Hi, everyone. Excited to come to you with this video newsletter this week. And joining us is one of my favorite people, Gilmara Villanova Mitchell, who is our colleague and partner in the work that we do. And one of the things that Gilmara brings to the team and her work is her extensive background from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. And we wanted to hop on today to talk about burnout and how burnout maybe doesn't look the same for everyone and isn't an equal opportunity. I don't know what I want to say, but it's not offender. But you may remember that Gilmara and I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago talking about what we've been seeing in leadership and the people we've been working with. And now we want to continue to expand and how burnout looks different for different groups. And so, Gilmara, hi, welcome
Hi,
to
thank
this
you for
space.
having me. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. So talk to us about when we think about this idea of burnout, because sometimes what can happen is we can take something that feels like it's a common experience and we can miss out on seeing how different groups, because of their lived experience, right, especially if they're a member of the global majority, if they're a part of a group or an identity that's systemically oppressed, how that burnout might actually impact them very differently than if you're a part of the dominant group.
Yes, so burnout definitely impacts people who are underrepresented in a different way, Sarah, because you add some extra layers to what we are experiencing collectively when you are part of a marginalized community. So you have to consider that people go through hate, that they go through discrimination, that they feel isolated sometimes in their organizations because they're the only person from that background. You have to consider there's microaggressions that pile up, and some people experience them because of the intersectionality, they experience them to a really intense level. And there's also other things that happen to underrepresented people, such as the feeling that I need to overperform to prove my worth, which is exhausting. Code switching, which is adapting your behavior, your mannerisms, your language to fit in and be accepted and have a shot to thrive at the organization. And also imposter syndrome is a huge thing for people from underrepresented backgrounds, just because a lot of times there is a misconception that we are hired because of our identity. And so you have to really work through that imposter syndrome phenomenon a lot harder.
Sure.
And so I have seen that the number of BIPOC people, people from underrepresented backgrounds, burning out is really ramping up. You know, it's a phenomenon right now, but it's even more intense for people who have to deal with those extra layers. Not to mention, when we watch TV, sometimes we are seeing live some heartbreaking things happening. And when it comes to, to racism, to political division, to bodily autonomy, and sometimes when that to LGBTQ plus issues, and sometimes when that impacts you on a personal level, you're not only watching and being heartbroken, but you're thinking that could be me, or that could be a loved one, which has an impact that it's even more devastating. And so, it's been a rough time for people who come from a marginalized background.
I was just talking to somebody this morning about how, when you're exposed to stories, whether, like you said, whether it's seeing it on the news or social media, or maybe somebody in your world has experienced it, and how that vicarious trauma is very real, right? That secondary trauma, especially if it's something that you've experienced, and it can bring forth, it can bring forth all of that pain, that suffering, that stress in a very quick way that maybe if you're somebody who hasn't experienced the same kind of traumatic perpetual challenges, might not experience. So one of the things that I'm curious about, because this is some work that you've been doing with a client of ours that's been really really powerful, both from the standpoint of the community who's impacted, but also the people who are supporting them, who are in the positions of power and authority who have influence over, you know, and I think that you and I talked about this a little bit during the podcast, but, you know, obviously there are things that, so here's what I would love to hear from you, right? There's things I feel like often when we talk about burnout, so much of the ownership is put on the individual. And while there certainly are strategies that I do want us to talk about that you have found to be really effective, particularly for you know, for individuals who are experiencing this sort of extreme amount of oppression and exclusion and potentially even aggression. And then I also want to talk about systemic things, because so often I think organizations sometimes don't feel like it's their responsibility, or they don't see how their policies are playing into it. So let's talk first, you know, for people who are listening to this who might identify and go, yeah, that's me. What are some of the things or some of the conversations you're having with folks as they're navigating this sort of onslaught of stress?
Mm-hmm. So at a leadership and organizational system level, I would say there are some things that we can do that really help alleviate some of the burnout symptoms. One is really address microaggressions. Mm-hmm. You know, if we are responding to microaggressions in a way that it's addressed, it's not allowed, and it's really taken seriously, people experience less of them, and that helps a ton with that trauma and with that exhaustion. When microaggressions go unnoticed and not addressed, the impact that it has on the person that experiences that daily is huge. Yeah. The other thing that we can do is establish employee resource groups. A lot of times the feeling of being the only two Black people in the office or the only gay person in the office leads to a sense of isolation that does not help most people with burnout. And so employee resource groups, I feel in my experience, have a huge healing impact and connecting people with others that can understand their shared experience, especially if they are formed based on identity. I think the other thing we can do is become even more flexible about structures, work arrangement, you know, where people do their work and hours that they use to do their work. Sometimes somebody might need to go to a therapist appointment in the morning, and they will catch up later on in the evening. And so having that kind of trust and flexibility to allow for those things to happen without adding one more layer of stress to schedule them, to attend them. And so facilitating those processes of looking for assistance from a therapist, a doctor appointment, taking care of your health, your mental health, in a way that your workload accommodates that with ease and without you having to go through so many hoops is really helpful.
Yeah.
Let me think what else can be helpful from a leadership and systems perspective. I think education about the trauma and the experiences that people have that you might not have, and trying to understand, like, for example, one simple thing people can do from an organizational standpoint is redefining professionalism. I see in a lot of companies, one of the core values is professionalism. What does that mean? Does that mean that we operate based on white norms and everybody who is not white has to adapt and code switch to have a shot at thriving at the organization? Or the way we look and we talk and we connect has to set the standard, is set by the dominant group as a standard, and everybody else has to comply with it, even though it might not be natural for them or comfortable for them in order to belong to that organization. And so I think that redefining some of our preset standards for what we expect that will happen in the work environment helps, because then people don't feel so inclined to compromise and cancel parts of their identity and shift the way that they prefer to do things to have a chance to succeed.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that, I just want to quickly echo or dig into. one of the things that I've learned and getting a chance to observe you and the work that you've done and what we've seen in organizations who have been able to navigate this differently and more effectively is that idea of the ERGs and using the ERGs to provide feedback, and having the leadership team listen to it. I think sometimes what we see is, right, organizations, they might develop the ERGs to put on events to educate other people, but they're not using, I mean, this, and again, what I've learned from you is that, like, the most effective is also that you're hearing the pain points, you're hearing the lived experiences, and then you're taking action as a leadership team, to adjust that. And that, and at that point of flexibility, I feel like we're in this world of individualization now, and sometimes I think that a barrier leaders might put up sometimes is like, yeah, but what if people take advantage of it? And it's just like, such a small number may, and they may not, but like such a large number can benefit from it. Yeah. The other thing, that last point about professionalism, this is something we've been thinking about a lot, is like, how do we weaponize things that they don't feel like civility or positivity? We have a positive culture, right? And we have or we're gonna handle things. We're gonna have this conversation like with civility, and it's like, well, what does that mean? Or even, I was talking with somebody, and they were using the language of like above the line, below the line, right? Below the line is reactive. They're like, we're gonna stay above the line, and it's like, yeah, and where does that get weaponized when people are bringing real concerns and real frustrations?
Yeah, I totally agree. We have to really think through these assumptions we put in place when we use those terms and that kind of language, because what happens is language leads people to behave in a certain way. And if they see something there that they don't see reflects them, they will change themselves and they will adjust so that they can fit in an unhealthy way, instead of really experiencing true belonging.
Yeah.
So I have been encouraging a lot of leaders to rethink some of the traditional ideas we hold related to our work ethics and how people connect and what's best, and who defines that, and how do we put in place things that apply to everyone, no matter who you are, that don't have dominant culture standard in them.
What would you say to the individuals who are maybe really struggling themselves individually, right? Like they're the only, what are some strategies they might consider, especially if they're in a situation where maybe they don't have the opportunity to look for another job, right? Like maybe they have limited, because of whatever reason, they have limited opportunities right now. So they have to be where they're going to be for a while. What are some of the things that you have found to be effective in navigating these waves?
Something that I have been telling people, Sarah, that makes them a bit concerned at first, but I think with time and some reflecting they can embrace, is there are seasons in life, and depending on the season you are going through, if you're caregiving, if you are dealing with trauma, if you are raising small children, you might not be able to offer 100% to your work. And that's okay temporarily. We cannot, as humans, offer 100% all the time. It's just not feasible to expect we'll be able to sustain that pace. And so a lot of people who I have been working with right now, we have been really discussing that idea. What does that mean for you to offer right now 70% and really focus on a couple important things and let some things be put on pause so that you can take care of your well-being? And how do you have that kind of conversation with your supervisor or your leader and say, right now, I'm not in a position that I can offer 100%, but this is temporary. And once I bounce back, I promise I will be here fully vested, and giving my best. We have to have grace with people when they ask for that kind of flexibility.
Yeah.
Their well-being comes first
Yeah.
before any project. It should. The other thing I tell people is really pick your battles. Not everything is worth our energy. We have a limited amount of energy. And especially when you are a person from an underrepresented background, identifying what's really important for you, what's a non-negotiable for you, and really advocating for those things to be in place, but letting the other things slide sometimes is really important.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you spend all your precious energy with things that might not have the biggest payoff at the end, and then you get home burned out and you don't have energy for the most important people in your life, and so really identifying what matters for you and focusing on spending energy with those things and selecting the other things out for the moment.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, if you have more, I was going to wrap us up a little bit,
but just one more thing is finding a supportive mentor who shares your identity sometimes can be very healing, because that person might be a little more advanced in their career and might have experienced some of similar things you are going through. And I feel like having a mentor who understands your challenges, your experiences, that comes from a similar background, sometimes can help, if you don't have an energy, or if you don't have somebody in your organization that has a common background, I would look externally, and ask somebody if you could have a mentoring relationship.
No, that's beautiful. Gilmara, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and helping us, be able to show up more powerfully for ourselves and for other people. And I always go back to one of the most important lessons. I mean, I've learned so much from you, and I always do, and you always push me, but you cannot be a great leader if you only know how to lead people who look and sound like you. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah, for having me. I always enjoy talking to you.